did my Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing at UC Irvine. And in that workshop was Alice Sebold, Glenn David Gold, Amy Bender, a screenwriter who's a very successful screenwriter named Phil Hay. So there was just an enormous amount of talent in that particular pool. Given the fact that I wasn't able to find, representation, I wasn't able to get any traction for this book that I had spent maybe about a year and a half working on, I decided that, well, I still wanted to be involved with books in some way. I wanted to be involved in the business in some capacity, so I decided to apply to a small publishing house, and I worked as the assistant to the publisher, and I worked there for about maybe 2 years, and from being the publisher's assistant, I worked my way up to being an editor. And I discovered that I really enjoyed it. I really liked working with writers. I think it was a way to kind of live vicariously through other people's sort of success by thinking, oh, like, I'm helping this book go out in the world. That's something I would like to do one day. So it was my way of being as close to the dream as possible without actually participating in it. Having been in a workshop which just spawned such enormous success, you can't just help but feel a little awestruck by the number of writers, even before my workshop year, that came out of that program. So part of me felt like, well, if these guys did it, maybe I could do it too. But I think a part of it was, kind of devastating. And at least was devastating to me to feel like, how did I become the Joe Piscopo of my workshop? Like, I was really like dynamic and I thought like I was writing good stuff. Where did I take that turn? So I think after about 10 years, I felt that I'd gone as far in publishing as I was willing to go, as I was able to go career-wise. And I figured, well, why not take this leap now? When I was working on the book, I had no idea if it would connect with anybody. I had no idea if it would connect with an agent or find an editor or any of those other things. There were times when I was writing and I thought like, man, I think I've got this horribly wrong. I think I'm way off base. But I hung in there because this was all I had. This was all I had when I went home. It was the one creative outlet that was exciting to me. And I just hung in there and I just kept doing it. So I think that if you have that desire, if you want to be a writer, you can walk away from it for years, but you'll come back to it. You'll find your way back to it. I was drinking lots of espresso sodas to keep me up late at night. I'd stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning because I was working a day job. I'd go to the day job, come back home around 6:30, 7 o'clock, and then just drink espresso soda and write from like 7 until like 1 in the morning. So once I finished it, it wasn't really finished because for me the process ends with the first draft, but then the revision process begins. So I would send it out to people, and I think I revised the book pretty much from the time I started getting reads on it almost until the time the book went to press. I was continually revising. So what happened in that process was that I sent it to readers whose opinions I trusted. I had a reader who'd been reading my work for almost 11 years, so I got her opinion as well. And based upon those opinions, I did an additional maybe 6 to 8 months of revisions. So from the time I had the original idea until the time that I felt it was ready to be shopped to agents, it was about 3 years. So I don't think I've ever really felt like it was done. I mean, I look at it now and I'm like, I think it's done. Can I revise it for the paperback? But like, I don't feel like it's still, I feel like it's still in process. There's only a finite number of books a writer is capable of writing anyway. There's only a finite number of books that will be on any writer's bookshelf. So at the end of the day, do you want financial success? Do you want, do you want that bookshelf to be, indicative of the best of what you're capable of? And I think for me, that's what's most important. I want every book on the bookshelf that I ultimately have. The next book I'm working on is a memoir. I want to do fiction after the memoir. I want every book on that shelf to be indicative of the best work that I'm capable of. Because for me to do any less would mean that I would be guilty of selling out my own creation, and I have no interest in doing that, especially having worked in the business for 10 years and seeing what happens when writers are often forced to make that kind of compromise. Because it's unfair to the writer and it's unfair to the publisher, but it's also unfair to the reader too. One, you're not as good of a writer as you think you are, except when you are. Jim Jarmusch, the film director, once said there are 2 traps that every artist must avoid: seeking praise and fearing criticism. And I have that quote up on my wall. I had it in my office when I worked in publishing, so that means any writer that came into my office would see that quote behind me. And it's such an important piece of advice. When you sit down to write, there's this idea that you're not being published because somebody else took your space on the bookshelf, and that's just not the case. Sometimes the work is just not as good as you think it is, but you need to feel that that work is as good as it can be in order to write every day. So I think in your mind, when you sit down to write, you need to feel like you're the best writer on the planet, and keep that in your mind. Write what you want to do for the day, then set that aside, and then the next day, revise it, tear it to shreds, start over again. Focus on the fundamentals of expressing yourself, and above anything else, the best writing instructor I had, who was at Irvine, Judith Grossman, said, no fun for the writer, no fun for the reader. And if there's anything that anyone takes away from what I've said here, they should take that away, because if you aren't having fun, you should go do something else.